Good evening. I'm Gene Policinski, Chief Operating Officer of the Newseum Institute, and I want to welcome you to the Newseum, Institute, and to the Knight Conference Center here at the Newseum. We're very pleased to have you, and I should explain that the Newseum Institute is a relatively new division, if you will, of the way we've organized ourselves here. We've had a number of centers and institutes, and as part of that reorganization, you're here tonight for an event sponsored by the Religious Freedom Center, which is a sort of graduation of sorts of the Religious Freedom Project that we've had going, but they're all freedoms of the First Amendment that are on the front of the building as you came in. And unfortunately, we do a survey every year of its debut programs. Thank you very much.
Online hate and free speech, where do we draw the line? There are so many ways of saying that. And to welcome you on behalf of Moment Magazine, is beyond just the domestic community. There's a good reason why Moment was chosen Magazine of the Year in overall excellence in religion coverage in 2012 by the Religious Newswriters Association. We Institute and its talented director, Charles Haynes, on such an important topic. I wanted also to thank Editions. We are also delighted to welcome our esteemed panelists and moderator. Let me start by introducing to campaign finance, the Justice Department, the Supreme Court, and the White House, and a few other things of interest to some. From 1999 through 2002, she served as Deputy National Editor, supervising reporters who covered.
So thank you for coming out. The Capitol, I'm excited about launching into it, and I'm going to start with introductions. I think Freedom Organization, working at the vanguard of technology and policy innovation. Under Leslie, she served in senior policy leadership positions in two prominent civil liberties organizations, including as chief legislator. All right. Chris Wolf, who's going to forgive me, leads the Global Privacy and Information Management Practice Task Force of the Interparliamentary Coalition for Combating Anti-Semitism. He co-authored the Robert Corn-Revere is a partner in the Washington, D.C. office of David Wright Tremaine, issued by the FCC for indecent broadcasts, including a $550,000 fine for the In 2003, he successfully petitioned Governor George Pataki to grant the first posthumous policies to limit the force of such speech without curbing freedom of expression. She is faculty associate. As many of us are, lapsing in or in my front yard, or say a Confederate flag waving. We're going to sort of miss the essentials of why we're here talking about speech and talking about
It's largely speech denigrating a person on the basis of race or religion or other character. Well, I think the relevance of the internet is just that a lot more people see and hear what people might have otherwise said. Very hard to. What was the question again? Where are we going?
We were talking about. Man. We were talking about.
It'll be on sale during the reception, and for you watching online, available on Amazon or Barnes and Noble.
I think you needed to hold it up for longer if you're watching online. And now I feel like Jon Stewart.
Because it really does matter, and as we explain in the book, haters used to be segregated. They would segregate themselves. It also is a medium that allows some of the haters to drown out other people and actually to chase them off the internet. And we'll get into that in a moment in terms of the drubbing that people have taken that have discouraged the medium. The statistics are amazing. There are 40,000 pages posted to Facebook every minute, 300,000 tweets.
Interesting you should start with that question, because that's the question that I had the entire time I was reading Chris's book. And by the way, I did buy my copy, of agreeing about 98% of the time with everything that Chris wrote in the book. Saying that hate speech, however you define it, is protected under the First Amendment. That humans and chimpanzees share between 96 and 98% of genetic material, DNA.
He just called me a monkey, but
see, it's everywhere.
That's exactly why I didn't want to push the analogy to racial epithets or those kinds of things that you normally associate with hate speech. But as I read more into the book, I found broadening examples of things that could be considered to be hateful in the abstract. And then the other part, and we'll get to this later, is that what exactly you do about ours. And you have instant access to information on a global scale. And that has find that what people argue is the good news about the internet is also the bad news. And the question is whether or not you...
and that we should toss it and use other terms instead. There's
you
several
have one
reasons.
in mind.
Contrasting quasi-definitions, as does international jurisprudence. For example, some definitions do include sexual orientation, many do not. There are other differences. Isn't very interesting or very important. If you say something that in some way damages me, an elaborate legal term of art, bad speech. So I'm interested in, as a group, any human beings as a group, as a society, for example, we all decide that a particular kind of speech is, again, this elaborate term, bad. For example, we all agree that it's bad to depict Mohammed. He wonderfully takes the example of the city of Chicago and says, if a judge tried to decide a case based on that sort of... so what is, according to Post and me, the only other reason, particularly, is violence. There is a very strong international consensus, that I'm going for a while, but therefore I have proposed this term, dangerous texts in brown paper wrappers and in dank basements. You can see I have read the book and listened to them. Out of dank basements, they start closing down media outlets, hurting people in any number of ways that I don't have to describe to you. That the internet opportunities to study the process by which speech travels from person to person and becomes popular.
Because that seems like one of the harder questions for you, Leslie.
In the context of the internet, that all of the jurisprudential terms we use, whether the internet is insightful, is something that I think is
Insightful, I-N-C-I-T.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
that one I think is very, very difficult. I think if you go outside of the United States and discrimination, so from the perspective of, if you're in Europe, there may be and while I don't want to suppress what they're saying, I think that resonates with me a little bit, because if you're ban it, no, but in a non-virtual world where people are close to each other, and go back to the Holocaust, as
we live. And so one of the things Abe and I talk about in the book is incitement to do really, it ranges from cyberbullying, which we read about all the time. We read yesterday about 2 teenage girls being indicted for murder because they caused, we're talking about criminalized hate speech.
we're just putting too many things in the bucket of hate speech.
No,
So,
because the haters took over. Science magazine, right? And Scientific American, my special, we can talk about how Facebook deals with that. But it is denigrating the experience.
Speech, but you are the inevitable target of hateful speech. And I totally agree with you, Leslie. I think it's really complicated to put everything into a bucket of hate speech. Let me give you some examples. These are actually real words.
you must get I get the misogynist
Well,
comments
so
that
then
are-
some of it, edges into misogyny. Seem to think it's really effective to call me Ruthie, right? Now, you wouldn't think of Ruthie as hate speech.
I thought that was an endearing name. Have the power of counter speech, unlike most people, because of the platform that you have.
Okay, that's a totally fair point, but likely to result in terrible consequences than the other. So how do we, let me push
Why
you on
bother
that,
with
but
that?
how can a speaker know, I am a public figure.
Good question.
Right? My attitude is cross the line, but not that far over the line, usually respond and say, oh, I'm so sorry. Your test of effects may not be that effective.
Well, first of all, I'm mostly part of the speaker's capacity to move those people comes exactly from the speaker's knowledge of the group of people, knowledge of their vulnerabilities, knowledge of the language and the jargon and their daughters. Yes, a friend of theirs may not know that the eggshell skull means potential of that speech to have terrible consequences.
Does the online piece affect you there? Is it worse?
The girls that were arrested for murder, for bullying, at least in the state.
Posting inside that community and basically taking actions to marginalize.
Far more vicious attacks and far more dramatic impact on kids.
But this ties into one of the things in your book that I do agree with, and that is the best notion that anonymity online is necessarily a bad thing. I agree with you that if you have very important to freedom of expression and has historically been true for political speech throughout. Southern states try to get membership lists from the NAACP and other organizations. The ability to be anonymous is very important to preserving freedom.
Well, yes, but, right? Is this where there is a risk of being exposed, or, even in the United States, where there's a risk that you're...
Who's making these decisions?
I was going to get to that.
So there's a couple of things to think about here. So I agree. Obligations on Facebook, and you have Mark Zuckerberg basically saying that people are critical. And I think that the people who provide the platforms for speech, and our laws have created a sort of two-sided bargain, and that bargain is content. And those two things together have become, I think, in some ways, the stand-in for the First Amendment online.
But in fact, that statute you're referring to is called the Good Samaritan provision.
It's a Good Samaritan provision, and it's possible level, and that they're getting demands from the United States and all around the world to
their platform to make it basically
Yes.
useless. So the Huffington Post just recently said they're no longer going to allow
Or the 16-year-old girl who wants to find out about abortion services.
Exactly. Or we could come up with lots of other examples. But when we are talking about the platforms that want to curate a civil place for political discourse, and when they conclude citing that passage, was there is a mob mentality that has taken hold of the comment section. But, they're interesting.
Find their name, you think of them as a cowardly blackguard.
And I'm not opposed to the idea that platforms can make with all that. But what I worry about is we have these enormous global platforms. And, there are with them too.
And they're more transparent about what they're doing, and they take both obligations
They do
very
take it
seriously.
very seriously. But if you have a decider, I'm all for it.
Not an alternative, because this is not a proposal for a decider, but we use this term counter speech, at least the five of us use it. Or speech, good speech is the solution to bad speech. That's a fundamental maxim of our understanding of the First Amendment. Communications or the internet really gives a new set of opportunities, is that it is possible to study by looking at these delicious big data sets immediately after the panel. But there really is some early evidence that counter speech, including ours, I suggest, are in that relatively malleable middle.
When those jokes are told, and they're told less and less frequently, they say that's not funny, it's racist, it's homophobic, it's anti-Semitic. Likewise, people could say the same thing on Twitter, as you suggest.
So there's clearly a role for education and for...
Makes a difference. What kind of engagement does have an impact? And then spread that.
Meryl Streep, where they review the videotape of their lives, and Meryl Streep's fine with it, but Albert Brooks is kind of upset. You mean they videotape my life? Or
And let's talk, for example...
Were you looking at the Capitol when you said that?
Yeah, some people, I know.
Jews behind it online.
Well,
that took hold.
As we know, it's
Coptic
always the
Christians.
Jews, but as part of the vast media, to some degree, the reaction that they got. So what do we do with speech like that? What does YouTube do when speech like that turns up? And how do we deal with that in...
We can put it in the book. And Bob knows that we struggled with it because we concluded it was not the kind of hate speech that you prohibit.
A number of people in this country saying, you shouldn't permit anyone to do that kind of offensive thing. That is contrary to our First Amendment traditions. In case, I guess the fatwa against Salman Rushdie for the Satanic Verses is just fine, and that it would be no problem suppressing that in the United States. Or H.L. Mencken simply wouldn't be able to publish today, to be suppressed. Any book by my friend Ben Gillette, God No, for example, or issues with internet intermediaries. It's one reason why the group National Religious Broadcasters, in its John Milton project, one example they cite is Mike Huckabee had a message on Facebook supporting very inflammatory or very offensive speech about religion. There's really just the trial. Evangelical Christianity, as everyone knows, is founded upon hate.
For that to be debated at the intermediaries. I mean, they are being more transparent, they provide more process.
But here's my bottom line problem with where you go in the system, where private entities are going to make
You haven't
decisions.
said at the tables that Leslie, Susan, and I sat at.
Yeah, I think that's, so
Innocence of Muslims, leave it
So
out?
Innocence of Muslims, you know, we were all talking about, I don't know how many people have seen it. It's less about should they leave it up or should they take it down. It's what do you do in a global environment? Human rights advocates and investors and academics trying to figure out the right course forward.
When you say YouTube did it right,
Population. So they resisted the demands that a single country or a single government could take this down for the world. But if they were operating in a country that had a Turkishness and were disrespectful to Ataturk,
Yeah.
and navigate between the protections they have in this country, the lack of protections they have in many other countries,
do for those based in the United States that do have those protections. And I didn't mean to suggest that the intermediaries were responding in all the ways that I think you'd like them to. I think they've been very responsible in maintaining a free expression.
Why? Because there were riots in those countries which may or may not have been really cataloged on YouTube. How did they know it existed? By the way, most of them never saw it. Most of the people who reacted in Florida, Hamid Karzai felt the need to talk about it on national television in Afghanistan. In the, if you like, receiving country or community, takes that message and then uses it to respond to your beginning question, Ruth. Even after the video was blocked by YouTube, that we wrote about the innocence of Muslims, that the intermediaries, the companies, Facebook, Google, Twitter, etc., have Egypt and Libya, they'd also put up a little message explaining why the video was tempered, that celebrates freedom of expression. And in other words,
you're sounding a little like that some people find hateful. We had a little discussion, of course, in cyberspace about
is effectively child abuse. That's therapy that tries to convert gay youths. Psychological harm to the point of suicides.
Right. So let's take it into the online world. So is sinful. You could end up in hell. You'll all eternity. Don't do this. It's by this kind of message. What do we do in that situation?
Well, is that any different than hypothetical?
people were constantly telling me I was going to hell. Just saying. Should have been in the South with me back in the day.
That in their churches, but they can't do it. Facebook's
Online,
decided and Google has decided.
Oh, that's
that
Facebook and Google
Well, that's what we're-
deciding tenets of their faith. And I think, I understand what Google's doing. I understand what Facebook's doing.
And by the way, I think they would probably let them express.
When we start going down that road, I don't know where we stop. I really, really don't.
I think religions that try to deprive me of my rights because of their conclusions about who I am, they're
Deprive you of your rights.
Right. Can decide we don't want that speech in here because it's going to drive people off, it's going to offend people, and it's going to injure people.
About whether there should be marriage equality.
No, I agree.
Okay,
Absolutely. But my spouse, and it's kind of time, place, and manner online. Facebook and Google can provide fora for that, but where it affects the individual.
So, yes, sir. And then if you'd go to the microphone.
Hi, I'm Ron Collins. There was something going on in Germany, and I think Holmes's response to that was lifelike maintained that pornography, as they understood it, constituted either violence. Any value involves risk. We must be willing to take risks. And Susan, is the touchstone really violence?
not in proper order, yes, absolutely. A radical extremist body of law such as jurisprudence, at least on the national constitutional level. In other ways, we restrict speech a lot, but that's a conversation for another day. Somehow we get away with it. In other words, there are other countries that every other country thinks that the risks are.
On the side, ma'am.
My name is Li Yang.
Pull it down a little, Dee.
My name is Li Yang. That is before this internet or now in the internet. I just wonder if this the tomato ketchup to around your house do everything or damage. They cannot do all type of things. This rather than staying away, could we do something about it?
Okay, and what I'd like to do, I think, is get
Firm, the internet is becoming more individuals can post anything they want. They can get around IPs. Groups like Anonymous can circumvent government, marry their homosexual partner, or a religion who wants them not to do that, to say that that's not a good framework to, I disagree with this religion and I hate it, and I have just as every right that you would have to go out and say.
Penalty for being homosexual in Uganda. And the United States.
As far as it's a case where the internet was used to incite, not the only way it's used to, the incitement to violence, and actually see the result. The internet makes that more difficult, but that doesn't mean it. I think that's a good thing, but I don't think it changes one way or another. Happened, at the back of a hut in a small village, you may not have known that the incitement happened. So in some
He said that the internet treats censorship like system damage and routes around it. And while governments can't stop speech, and I agree with you, they have the right to adopt whatever policies they want. But I wonder if we want to live in a world if, say, Google, for example, woke up one morning. And that gets to the question about, can't I be a hater? Well, yeah, you can. But in a marketplace they will put out at these demonstrations, the only reason we really know about these people is because of the efforts to last member.
But it's really interesting illustration of the harmful power of speech, right?
County University. I wrote down my question so I could be concise.
Did you post it?
Not yet.
well, he just
They were arrested and charged with stalking, and these are, I believe, a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old. And
You to have a device and to use it unsupervised, which I think is just an abdication of responsibility.
And that's one of the points that the sheriff made.
Literacy education, education about the power of technology, and their parents have a role to play.
can I just follow up?
You also are dealing with the teenage brain, which is not yet fully formed.
In this area.
But there are a couple of things that I'd like to ask you to address specifically. Arms, as interpreted by these companies, because that's what they're doing when they review material, actually suppresses women's of the bylaws and the standards and the guidelines.
So there was also an earlier question that does not necessarily do physical violence to other people,
Right.
but that does a very important kind of harm. More and more traction in American public discourse. That I'm glad.
an extraordinary lack of understanding about where to draw the lines.
And it stayed up for 5 days, and we effectively had it removed for lots of reasons.
But the companies have, as I said, they're the deciders, and they
Right.
get to draw the lines. And I do agree, for a long time kind of been, if you're going after a particular woman, then that's one thing. If you're just sort of, I think there's substantial evidence at this point to support the own motion and say what they think about all of this.
I'm afraid we're going to have.
Who decides what is hate speech and what are the penalties? And Susan, this is directed a little bit more.
Political speech, Dominic.
It just says something about our times that hate speech and discussion.
Characterize the badness of speech must depend on another normative.
It's the highest level.
I'm so sorry. I think I'm going to disappoint you and answer this seriously, much as I'm. There are many fascinating and difficult cases in which what I call dangerous speech, speech that seems, or harm. And after the panel, I guess I would love
Presentation and the audience for being patient and for asking good questions and for turning up.
because I've been in a bubble too. Yeah. The person who had the reception, and Chris, you know, you're going to give a discount, I'm sure, after all this. No. It'll be full. You taped it so it can live on online. They can't take it down. And let them get to the reception and engage.